Welcome back, guys, to another episode of Gym Goss, and this is an all Asian affair. We are all across the country, and Bali, the boys, currently, and I believe, and I am in Singapore. And welcome, Mackenzie.
Thanks for having me, gents. Really appreciate it, and I'm pretty thrilled to have a good chat.
As are we, mate. And so basically, give us a bit of a rundown. You're a coach. You've completed or are completing your masters, I believe. Your alias is Macro Steve, and you're a surfing extraordinaire. Anything I've missed, feel free to add to that list.
So probably work with Fortitude Nutrition Coaching as like a nutritionist. We just do like nutrition stuff there, obviously. And then doing a master's kind of like at the pointy end of it. And I start my research, final research thingamajiggy very soon. Obviously master's level is nothing even close to scratch the surface of what Jackson has done, but I'm going to try and the aim is to look at energy availability in surfers. So compare athletes to just recreational surfers is sort of the goal, but we'll see how it ends up looking. Do a little bit of stuff for a company called Surf Science as well, which is like a surf nutrition entity, I guess I'd call it. They have a few products as well in the mix. And live in Indonesia. It's probably about it. Yeah.
Awesome. And tell me a little bit. I've always wanted to ask you this. Where did Macro Steve come from? I think I started following you well into the piece, and he was already well established, cult figure amongst nutrition folks. So tell the people what Macro Steve is all about.
Macro Steve is a few things. To a degree, it's probably my past coach self to a certain extent, mixed in with some other sort of rigid approaches to coaching that get thrown around, where it's very much coach centered. It's not really cognizant, or the coach hasn't really taken the time to get to know the client and assumed that they have the same values and interests as they do, and want to do the same things basically with their nutrition. And there was a few other little things in the mix that kind of helped me form this Macro Steve character, such as ages ago, like years ago, I wrote this little 7-page ebook thing with like 7 simple example days of eating, which I just wanted to create a resource. And this guy was like calling me out on his Insta story because I included almonds in one of the meals, and he's like, "That's fucking calorie dense." Sorry, am I allowed to swear?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, he's like, "Oh, that's fucking calorie dense." And like, I also didn't specify an exact amount of almonds, and he's like, "This is why people can't lose weight." And like, sort of that prompted me to create this character called Macro Coach Steve. I don't know why Steve though. I think it was like, actually it could have been because that Biggest Loser guy, Commando, his name's Steve. So I feel like there was probably a bit of that in the mix. But yeah, I don't know why Steve. It just kind of sounds like a hardcore Aussie bloke name who's like, more like do this. And yeah, it's just Macro Coach Steve, I reckon.
Macro Coach Steve. And I think it's a really good segue into what I wanted to discuss with you today, which was a lot about how you've come up with the concept of nutrition toolkit. And rather than having a set meal plan, these very rigid diet approaches, you describe the nutrition toolkit as a list of options that can fit various situations, life circumstances, which is beneficial for when people encounter those curveballs where they're unable to follow their meal plan. So the nutrition toolkit, what are the other benefits of that over, say, a rigid meal plan, or a set in stone default diet that somebody has to follow?
Yeah, so I guess the toolkit can be defined in a few different ways. Is it a toolkit of meal ideas and snack ideas for lots of different circumstances, or are we talking a toolkit of different dietary approaches, whether it be something more for the populations that you folks might work with, such as bodybuilders, your macro coaching, for example, or would it be more of like the non-tracking side of things, habit building? And sort of, to me, the benefits of a toolkit is it provides you with either a strategy or an option that is valuable and beneficial for all different circumstances, whether that be different goals, different nutrition literacy, different stages of someone's nutrition journey. Yeah, so it's kind of like, obviously by choosing the right approach or the right tool for the job, you're increasing the applicability of the intervention or the meal or the whatever for the person and that situation. It also can be tailored quite a lot. It can be very bespoke, and it can cater for individual preferences. It's more of what I would call a client-centered approach, where, you know, rather than just prescribing or providing advice or telling what to do or this is how it's going to be, you've taken the time to understand what sort of person your client is, what their life looks like. You've taken the time to understand what their deeper values and priorities in life are, what interests them, what sort of barriers they face. And then you've then trickled that down through the intermediate goals, through to the specific actionable goals, and being able to apply an intervention that they're more likely to adhere to, that is going to have a lower effort cost relative to reward ratio for them. So again, increasing adherence, as well as through implementing an appropriate intervention or strategy, likely reducing the risk factors for that individual. So to provide an example, you know, macro tracking is sort of like, I view it as the go-to strategy in the evidence-based, you know, whatever, nutrition circle jerk. And it's a fantastic tool. It's got so many great benefits, but it's not always the right tool for the job. There are numerous situations where macro tracking can be a risky thing for some folks. For example, those who have had past disordered eating, those who, you know, might also, it might not be appropriate for certain folks. Their goals might not be very high level. They might have a lifestyle that makes it very difficult, or a job even that makes it difficult for them to feasibly, consistently track their macros to a relatively accurate degree. So rather than fighting that, rather than just providing advice and giving them solutions, oh, you can track in this way, you can track in this way, you know, you can track it using this little hack or whatever, or, you know, rather listening to them, rolling with their resistance and listening to their ideas as well. And if they don't have any ideas, providing them with the toolkit options. And yeah, long story short, the toolkit just expands, in my opinion, the amount of different situations you can work, client situations you can work with successfully. It increases the applicability and the likelihood of adherence, and it reduces the potential risk that some interventions or approaches, when used in isolation, might bring. Long story short.
Yeah, no, that was very thorough and detailed. There's a lot to unpack there, Jackson.
Too thorough.
No, that was good. Jackson, anything you want to ask or add on there?
I mean, like, I don't know much about the specifics of it, but it sounds great in theory, right? This is all that stuff just said there was like theoretical. I'd like to, like, is this a resource that you give to clients? Sorry, I'm a bit sort of uninformed on this. Is that what it sort of is? Or are you selling it as an online resource or something like that?
No, definitely not selling it. I'm definitely not giving it a resource. It's not really like a set. It's not like a tangible.
It's a concept.
Document. It's a concept. Yeah, it's okay. like if you have a client, it's like, rather than just assuming that, you know, this, rather than just saying this is my method, okay. Mm-hmm. Rather than just saying that this is my method, this is what all my clients do, this is the same strategy, the same process. You adopt more of a, you know, I'm going to listen to what the client is all about, what they want to do. And then I basically, as a practitioner, I've got a toolkit of different strategies and options that I can utilize to help this client. So sort of like this, it's like, I guess an analogy that carries a level of applicability, but that could be argued, is a builder or someone trying to build a building is going to want more than just a hammer. There's going to be different tools needed for different processes of building that house. So if you have a toolkit, the process is going to be more efficient, it's going to be more effective, and the house is probably going to be a little bit better. I guess that could be the way I describe it. But yeah, it's not like a resource. It's not like something that I could create as like a tangible document or something.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
So,
Yeah,
so
it's
makes
sort
more
of
sense.
just,
there's two levels of this from what I've gathered in your explanation there, and from obviously following online. There's the level of the coach where you're looking at a number of strategies that they have available to coaching their clients, whether it be, say, calories and macros, a default diet meal plan, giving them meal options and ideas, habit formation, focus, all that kind of stuff. And then for the client, it's giving them a toolkit of meal options and ideas for various situations as they go through their diet. Is that basically sort of what it is in a nutshell?
Yeah. I would say that that's a fair summary, but just to sort of jump in there with the second part, or actually we'll go the first part first. It's not always like use this tool or use that tool.
Yeah.
It's like a mix and match thing.
Yeah.
So someone might even be tracking their macros, but there might also be habit building components in there. So it might be, for week 1 and 3, what habits would you like to focus on, Sally? Sally said, I'm interested in eating more vegetables. And then you go into the action plan, the why, how, and all that sort of stuff. How do you want to do it? And that could be their focal habit for week 1 to 3. And then, so you've got macro tracking within that, but then also you've added in the habit building thing. So you're mixing and matching. So that's one thing that's important to mention. Then with part 2, you can provide those default diets, like you said, and that will provide you with some options or provide a client with, some toolkit items. But it's also helping the client work through meal ideas and snack ideas that suit them, suit their preferences. And as they encounter barriers throughout their journey, I was traveling for work, or, I had a late meeting, and, they slip up and they do something that they deem to be undesirable, you can help them build a solution, and that will add to their toolkit. So the toolkit item for when they have a late meeting. And through experience, you can have that discussion to kind of guide them through building their own toolkit. So rather than, it's not just, hey, here's your toolkit. Yeah. I'm giving you like all these meal ideas, rather than just throwing them at them. You're saying, okay, well, let's actually work on this over time and expand it as we work together, and expand it through your experiences of your nutrition journey.
So there's a lot of autonomy and agency given to the client in this process, which I like. So Jackson, what are your,
I was going to say, it's funny to me, like this theoretical toolkit, it just, to me, sounds like how good coaches should be coaching. It's like, it's the alternative to one-dimensional coaching, I guess, and which is highly relevant in sort of recent times, where we're seeing this big general shift in the increase in popularity of online coaching, and a lot of the lower grade coaches coaching like calculators, essentially like algorithmic coaching. It's like they've got basically 2 tools to use, and it's assess whether they are progressing their body weight at a desired rate, and if not, it's a calorie intake up or down, or it's a cardio prescription up and down. And that's basically all they've got. So I 100% agree, and it's almost annoying to me that we have to talk about this, because it just should be how coaches coach anyway. It's catering the approach to the goals, lifestyle, psychology of the individual, as opposed to being like all these people need macros. So yeah, I've talked about this a little bit recently, but like the basic coaches, they will just coach the physiological principles and or the fundamentals, and that'll be like macros, how much protein, carbs, and fats they should be targeting in their day. And maybe they'll even go to a higher level of saying, okay, we're going to have specific timings and frequencies and things like that. But like true good coaching is trying to unpack the psychology of the individual and catering your approach to that.
You guys would be the first to know that, or the first to acknowledge that the calculation coach approach probably isn't something that you're too stoked about, if you will, or advocate for. But I mean, to throw a bit of empathy back at those sort of coaches, it's like, coaching to this very bespoke level where you take the time to get to know your clients and you have multiple different systems, it can be quite time consuming from a coaching perspective and very mentally draining. And, from a business perspective, especially if you're doing training as well, which I don't do, I can just see how that would be very difficult for a lot of those coaches. And look, the other thing is, a lot of different coaches will attract different demographics. Like you guys are going to work with, I would imagine at least, although I'm speculatively saying this, very different clients to what I would work with. And therefore our approaches are not going to be the same. And that's completely fine. But yeah, I am of the strong opinion that it is worth taking the time to get to know your clients, because it bolsters that client coach relationship. The client feels heard and understood, builds that relationship, better outcomes for the clients, like rather than using shame and those sort of things, using empathy and positive regard, better outcomes for the clients, a more fulfilling career experience for the coach, thus increasing longevity of the practitioner. And there is a paper that I will include in my presentation to UEBC where lower levels of empathy from practitioners was associated with higher rates of burnout.
Interesting. I think a lot of the sort of unidimensional coaching comes from people who are just starting out in the industry and they haven't actually garnered a breadth of experience with a wide variety of people yet. They're young coaches who are online. They've sort of skipped working with people face to face and they're just coaching online. So they haven't really experienced the human component of coaching yet. Or it's people on the other end of their coaching career, say, for example, Elaine Nortons, who are, creating apps and stuff where seriously, it's like they've had all the human experience and they're like, fuck this. I don't, have the scope to work with this many people and be, emotionally present for all these people. So I'm going to create something automated and that's how I'm going to make my living. I see that to be the two primary sort of situations that coaches who are doing this, here's your calories and macros, started their career, they don't understand people, or at the end of their career and they're like, I'm done with people now. So here's your
that's a good point. That's a fucking good point.
Yeah.
So that's sort of how I see it. So where does macro coach Steve sort of sit on that equation? Is he starting out or is he at the end of his career?
Nah, I'd say he's more at the end of his career. He's like that bitter old dude who's been in the gym for like 20 years. Yeah. He's like, oh, I fucking hate these lazy clients, bloody track your macros, you softy.
He's that stereotypical dude in Thailand who's just been there for like 30 years, pumping himself full of juice. He's got the loose skin, the tats. He's got his little Thai lady on his bike out the front. And he's telling you that you could do more, you could be better, that he could have one day been a champion, but he didn't, injuries, all that kind of stuff. He's that guy.
Yeah. And we've all got the same 24 hours in a day. And, you just don't want it bad enough. And yeah, he's got those shoes, those bodybuilder shoes, the big red ones, the high top ones.
The fucking Kai Green specials.
Oh,
yeah,
the Raptors.
Those ones.
The
those
fucking
ones.
Raptors.
Yeah, he's got those ones, those fucking shoes.
All right. Another thing I think, we've sort of touched on a lot here, but feasibility of diet and obviously long-term adherence is a huge thing that you bang on about, Mac. And we've sort of seen cheat meals get bashed a lot in recent times, and obviously the terminology is important, right? Because the words we use infer certain meanings, and they take on a different meaning depending on the person and their interpretation of the word, whether it be a literal interpretation or something more subjective. But you like to deem a cheat meal as an indulgent meal, right? And we know that indulging can even carry a negative connotation and is viewed as something that we shouldn't do if we're dieting or trying to lose weight. However, you do recommend indulgent meals. So can you elaborate as to what indulgent means to you when you hear that word? Because I'm sure a lot of people would think indulge means to stuff yourself silly, like a cheat meal kind of thing. And then elaborate as to why you think it's a really good idea for dieting and long-term adherence.
Yeah, that's a fantastic topic. Thank you for asking it. So the first thing I think I'll mention, and I'm going to speculatively say that we'll agree on this, is the term cheat meal can just fuck right off. Like we can just throw that one right away. In terms of the indulgence, so the premise of it is understanding that food is more than just fuel for the machine. Obviously, a bodybuilder in a prep, food is fuel for the machine. But in those, not in those contexts, food serves a lot of different purposes. And rather than labeling foods as good or bad, it recognizes that there are foods out there that can be consumed for the purpose of, what would be used under the umbrella of indulge. And it could be because you like the taste of a particular food and you find it enjoyable. It could be because there's a valuable social experience that's going to enhance your life via your social health. So there's many different reasons why the concept of eating something that's not nutrient dense or got protein or doesn't have fiber or whatever, in my opinion, can and should be a part of a health-seeking diet. And as you blokes would also know, and I know this for sure, is, your diet doesn't have to be 100% clean for you to be healthy and achieve your goals. With that being said, obviously there are considerations like, okay, with enhanced palatability, it might be difficult to control calories, blah, 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 all very, very, very valid and true. But the idea of the daily indulgence is giving yourself permission to eat something for a different reason, to help someone move away from the dichotomous, or thinking about nutrition in a dichotomous manner. And the wording of the indulgence, or the phrasing or the thought process around it, is very important. And I like how you raised the point, and that actually challenged me a little bit there, where you said a lot of people might think of an indulgence as just like go all in or cheat. I believe you said something along those lines. And I think that's a really good point to touch on, because sort of if I was working with a client and we were talking about this topic, and I would sort of be saying, well, what is the purpose of indulging? What are you actually trying to get from it? And it might be due to an upcoming birthday or a wedding or just a dinner with their partner on the weekend. And they might say something like, oh, I want to spend time with this person. I want to enjoy this because I love fine food. I've got a client who lives in London, and she's, fine food and going out to restaurants is like one of her biggest interests in life. It's a biggest hobby. So it's sort of like, well, what are you trying to get from this? And then it's saying, okay, so you want to get X, Y, Z from it. What sort of approach to this meal, or what sort of level of indulging fits that mold? Is it the all-in cheat meal style where you eat until you can't walk? Or is it adopting more of a connoisseur approach where you say, this is an indulgence, I'm enjoying it for these various reasons. The amount I need to achieve these reasons is somewhat in the conservative realm, because I'm also cognizant of my health-seeking values / weight loss goals or whatever. So we kind of work through it based on that sort of framework. And I guess the way I would define it would be a consciously approached decision to indulge for a purpose that considers what would be the minimum effective dose needed for the intended purpose, or what you're trying to get from the indulgence, that also considers your longer term health seeking values and goals.
Yeah, I rate that. Jackson, what do you think about the indulgent meal?
It's actually nice to hear someone that shares a similar opinion to mine on the matter. I would dare say that there is very few people, coaches in the evidence-based crowd that support what we're talking about here. So like scheduled off-plan free meals, reward meals, whatever you want to call them. Like Brandon Kempter, for example, love him, great guy. We talked about them a fair bit when he was here, and like he's very like of the what I would consider traditional evidence-based approach, where it's like, no, there's no such thing as off-plan meals. It's like just estimate, track it, fit it in, all that sort of stuff.
He titrates them in.
Yeah, he bespokes them.
And I for 3 out of every 4 clients that I work with, they'll have at least probably one off-plan meal scheduled, and the instruction is important. So like things being said like, it's not Ben and Jerry's on the couch is something that I'll use pretty often. It's like, I want you to go out to a restaurant with a family or a friend and order something regular off the menu, eat until you feel satiated, but not beyond, and not until you feel uncomfortable. And the purpose of this is not to hyper consume calories. It's a opportunity for you to have a social occasion and a sense of normality in your week, at a time where potentially there's a lot of abnormality in your week in terms of the a fair bit of restraint that's going on in the majority of your week. And I think having that ability to be able to maintain somewhat of a social life and somewhat of normality, especially around the weekend when most people are sort of want to let their hair down a little bit, I think that does a profound amount for the transition post-diet, especially because you do have some people very capable of saying, okay, well, 12-week, 16-week target, and that's the end game, and they can go with no off-plan meals or no social meals for that whole period of time. But it's not a sustainable 10-year approach. And so what's going to happen sort of after that period of time? So I think that there's a lot of merit for having them scheduled, and they won't work for everyone. I think that's probably an important thing that I've learnt. It's if it starts triggering a binge, or if it's being followed by a sense of guilt or shame or anything like that, there probably needs to be an audit of what's going around it, and maybe even pull them out for a period of time. But for at least my clients, I'll get them to report what they had, or like just share your order, what you had. And so I can just sort of keep tabs. And if I see like red flags going up with like things that look like it's eating in what I would deem sort of a non-normal manner, then I'll sort of step in and make some adjustments. But I still think for 75% of the time, for the people that they are done well, 75% of the time. And when they are done well, I do see superior, at least from my like observations and that conclusion that I'm making subjectively, I do see better outcomes in terms of sort of the well-being that can be maintained across the diet, and the transition into sort of a less restrictive period of a less restrictive dieting approach post that.
I wanted to make another point there, which off the back of what you just said, Jackson, you spoke about transitioning to a less restrictive period, and you also mentioned sort of like what's more viable sort of in a 10-year sort of perspective or a longer term perspective. One thing that I personally see a lot of value in with, those discretionary meals, if we want to call them, those controlled or conscious discretionary meals is, for me, unless it's necessary, my typical recommendation is to not actually track it. And now they can record it or whatever, or they can use hand-sized portions, but really it's an opportunity to practice calorie consciousness or conscious eating without needing to rely on numbers and data. And I personally see this as holding a lot of value for someone who is in a tracking phase, for the clients of mine who are tracking, because it gives them an opportunity to practice those skills. So when it's time to move away from tracking,
it's another tool.
It's when it's time to move away tracking, or when they're on that holiday, or when they're at that wedding or something, they're not going to say to themselves, oh, I can't track this, therefore, how you hear people say, oh, if I don't track it, I'll just eat and eat and eat and eat and eat. It's like, we want to avoid that situation by giving them the confidence and the skill that they can stay conscious and controlled. And I feel like practicing that in the real world I see that as pretty pivotal. And look, they stuff up, people slip up, they overindulge, that stuff happens. But trying to flip it around into a positive, using positive regard and empathy, so they don't feel shame and such a high level of guilt, or a bit of guilt's natural, to try and flip it around into an opportunity to actually learn. So you went to this dinner, this birthday dinner, you had 3 more slices of pizza and 2 extra drinks than you would have liked, that would have been deemed appropriate for the health seeking sort of middle road approach. Okay, what can we learn from this? What can you do differently next time? And then the next time we can practice that. So I see so much value in that. But yeah, obviously there are plenty of situations where you would want to track that meal, and tracking would be appropriate for the goal and beneficial from an education perspective. I think there's also a lot of truth from the idea of tracking it, so you know how many calories are in it. Like, oh shit, there's like 1,500 calories in this pizza. I would have never have known. So yeah, I see value in either direction, but I also see a lot of value in the non-tracked variant of the meal.
Yeah, I think most people come into nutrition coaching or a diet with a very binary and dichotomous perspective on nutrition. They're either on the plan, off the plan, these foods are good or bad. And I think the role of a good coach is to get people familiar with the gray. So learning about, obviously calories, macros, and, that, hey, there's no such thing as good food, bad food. And then also being able to then transition them to a place where they can see periods of non-tracking as being okay as well. And I think with situations like this, it's very context dependent, and you have to take it on a case-by-case basis as to how you approach these things. But for many people, it's about going into these experiences where they're not going to track or they're going to indulge, and having the training wheels on at first. So saying, okay, yep, you can go and indulge, giving them some more guidelines and prescriptions around what they should do, because I'll feel okay with that. And then I've certainly seen in my experience that works better at the start than letting them just indulge, without any sort of guidance to say, yeah, just enjoy the occasion, whatever, and indulge. You do have to have some training wheels on, more guidance around it. And then over time, they learn from those experiences. And I think the reflection is a huge part of that, is them feeling, okay, that was probably too much. That wasn't a good idea to eat the whole pizza and then 3, tubs of Ben and Jerry's. And then next time they dial it back. And have you seen anything in your experience that can help the client sort of make that transition a little bit quicker?
As in being able to approach discretionary meals in that sort of not overindulging manner. Yeah, absolutely, kind of in alignment with what you said, having the training wheels on. I don't necessarily think that it needs to be tracking as the training wheels. I think because there are, like, I've got clients who flat out do not want to track. They don't like going on their phone, or they're just not very good with technology. But that's just an example. Like, I think the training wheels can be lots of different things. It could even be guidance around, well, going through that discussion of what is the purpose, what are you trying to get from it, what do you think is the approach that aligns best with that. If it's something that's planned in advance, they might know where they're going to actually eat, and they can look at the menu and sort of, we can say, okay, well, what option here do you feel best aligns with the purpose? So sort of talking through it in advance. Then I also think protein and plants model is really helpful. So advising them to, or suggesting, hey, focus on getting a solid portion of plants and protein in the meal first and foremost when you're ordering. Be cognizant of some added fats, because that's where you're going to get a lot of additional calories, things like certain cooking methods that you want to think about, uses of oils and whatnot. And then also potentially some hand-sized portion techniques or ideas when it is viable. It's difficult for a thing like a spaghetti bolognese, but if you've got something that's pretty clear cut, like chicken schnitzel, salad, chips, you can see like, okay, I'm going to aim for a palm of protein, and a cupped handful of the chips or whatnot. And if there's more chips left over, then I'll just sort of pass on them. And also doing things like, can I share the indulgent component of the meal to enhance the enjoyment or the social experience? Sharing a chips or sharing a dessert with someone. So you're enjoying that together, and therefore the portion size is also smaller, but you're still attaining the experience that you wanted. You're still attaining the benefit of enjoying that dessert, for example.
Awesome.
That's it, yeah. I think Jackson had a point he wanted to raise.
Yeah. So I think it's interesting that people associate off-plan meals, cheat meals, free meals with poorer relationships with food, or at least exacerbating poor relationships with food. Whereas I actually think trying to track those occasions can actually be developing worse relationships with your eating and your food, because you go into these situations where the goal of it is for mental relief, right? That's at least where my framework of thinking comes from. And now you've got the client trying to guess the amount of oil that might be in the dish, guessing the portion size, hyper analyzing the menu prior, playing macro Tetris with all the different options. That's causing mental strain, not relief. So that's one of the reasons why I'm sort of a little bit anti trying to track off-plan meals or social meals. And then secondly, even if you do go down the route of like, oh, I'm going to fit this in, which everyone likes to say, and I think that's sort of a rationalization for them feeling like they haven't broken their plan. Even if you track it, there's a fucking shot in the dark that you're going to be actually accurate, because we know, at least from the research, if you're pulling data from menus from like commercial restaurants and stuff like that, that they can be anywhere upwards of 200% inaccurate. And then if you're not going by the menu, if you're just going by your own skills and knowledge of nutrition, then you have a tough job to try to estimate the contents of oil, the contents of sauces, and things like that. And the less experienced you are, the bigger the error margins are going to be in your estimates. But even for people who I would say are relatively experienced, like for example, just to add to this, we had a bunch of like fitness people in Bali, and we went to one of the fitness restaurants, and it's a fitness restaurant, but the calorie contents of the meals are very, very high, and there's things like coconut oils and things like that. And I knew all the
I know
macro,
the one.
yeah. I won't roast them because I got friends there, but so like I know all the calorie contents of these meals, and some of these people like experienced coaches, and just as sort of this game, I was getting them to like estimate the calorie contents of like the waffles that we're eating and shit like that. And a lot of the time they're 100% off. You know what I mean? Like there was a 50% estimate of what was actually in the meal. So even for people who are experienced, they have a pretty tough time trying to gauge what's actually in front of them when they're eating. And this is dangerous because they go home and they look at my fitness pal and they're like, yep, tracked it, stayed on plan, tick that day. And in reality, they're far from it.
Yeah, I think you're definitely going to have people who will try to track and control what they eat out, and they'll feel better about it. And then those who will feel worse if they do as well. And that's going to depend on obviously what they've eaten and how accurate they are. Mackenzie.
Just one more point to that. Yeah, I just think the idea of people think like if it's tracked, it's good. If it's not tracked, then it's bad and it's off plan. But a non-tracked meal, I would almost say to that's part of the plan. Like rather than say it as an off-track meal or an off-plan meal, make it part of the plan. Like part of the plan is actually practicing this skill. This is part of our coaching plan. It involves, if you actually tracked every single meal, that would be off plan, so to speak. And I think framing in that way can help people move away from the idea that what they're doing is taking them away from their desirable path. Because as soon as they're off track, hey, I'm off track, I've fallen off the wagon, then usually, or often in my observations at least, that can result in sort of that self-sabotage that continues, catastrophizing, negative thoughts and shame, make it more difficult to then go and control calorie intake later on. So I think, saying like this is part of the plan is kind of a bit of a mindset shift that, in my opinion, can help people not view these things as inherently bad for their relationship with food or bad for their goals or anything like that. And I would agree with Jackson and say being able to nail social meals is a fantastic thing for your relationship with food, because it basically moves you away from the idea that I can't do them and it's because they're off track and bad.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there. It's how you frame it. It's making the client appreciate and buy into the idea that it's part of the strategy that's going to facilitate the attainment of their long-term goals. And that can be a really tricky thing to communicate, or at least to get somebody to buy into when they're coming to the coaching table with a host of dichotomous thinking, very rigid, restrictive thoughts around food and diet, and they view their progress as being on or off plan and stuff like that. So that's definitely something for coaches to work on, and it's not something that would come overnight, I wouldn't imagine. Would it, Mackenzie?
No,
we need to coin a term and just shill the fuck out of it for these meals.
So on that note,
it's actually not a good term to use.
No, it's framing their perceptions of nutrition, really. That's like, that's fucking hard. Is bland better for fat loss, Mackenzie? We know that physiological hunger as well as hedonic factors are going to influence our desire to eat a certain food. Obviously the more palatable and tastier food is, the more we want to seek it out and we want to eat it, and that's, I guess, the theory behind why bland foods are more viable for adherence to a lower calorie, diet that's going to have an energy deficit, all the rest of it. But you've discussed previously that there are some drawbacks and consequences to a bland and boring diet. And I know Jackson's an advocate of a quote unquote bland diet for fat loss, and I would agree that for his context, that's probably a good idea. So, what are the drawbacks of a bland diet, and how does this impact long-term adherence?
I think that for fat loss, for dedicated fat loss, especially a fat loss phase, going down a bland approach makes a lot of sense. It makes more sense. Obviously, as you mentioned, palatability is a consideration that will influence, I guess, to put it simply, how much you're going to eat. But I think that saying that my diet's going to be bland exclusively, maybe not for a shorter dedicated fat loss phase, but more as a long-term theme, I think that firstly creates a roadblock to viewing social meals as not a bad thing, or viewing them as still on track. And I think that it also reinforces the notion that foods are good or bad, because I'm going to eat a bland diet. Therefore, foods that are not bland or fit that mold are not part of what I'm meant to be doing. So in my opinion, it could possibly reinforce this idea of that dichotomous around foods being good or bad.
Would you say, sorry, Mackenzie, that the same could be said for high volume foods?
Absolutely.
And that's something
Yes.
that is more of a conceptual issue with the bland food being viewed as good, high volume, good, more so than
it's a really good point. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. There's a lot of things like, for example, old macro coach Steve, who called me out on almonds. Almonds are bad because they're high in calories, because they're high in calorie density. Just moving away from that idea, I think in the long term is beneficial. In terms of adherence to calorie control, this is speculative. I think, like I said, a bland approach for an acute phase, like I'm going to do more of a mini cut for a period of time, or I'm a bodybuilder competing and doing a prep or something. Just a disclosure statement: I don't work with bodybuilders, so the listeners know that.
Macro coach Steve does.
Yeah, he definitely does. He makes his 60-year-old client who just wants to lose 5 kilos, he makes her do a prep. But yeah, I think, the thing is, people can say I'm never going to eat chocolate again because it's not bland. It doesn't fit the mold of a bland and boring diet. Just like people could say I'm never going to eat almonds again because it's not high food volume, low calorie per bite or whatever. But I think these foods are always going to make their way back into your life. I could say to myself, I'm never going to eat chocolate again. I'm going to go to Christmas Day and my grandma is going to be like, here you go. And if I haven't had chocolate for a year, again, speculative, and I'm open to being thrown, getting pushback from this, but I'm probably going to be like, oh my God, chocolate, fuck, give it to me. I'm going to eat. But if I have chocolate consistently, or if I enjoy foods for the purpose of indulging relatively consistently in health-seeking portions, with the diet overall theme being that whole food focus, whatever, I personally feel like my ability to consume that indulgent food, in this example, chocolate, to be in a far better place. So I guess that would be my stance. I'm not anti-bland diet by any stretch of the imagination. I guess you could say that I'm not an advocate of a bland diet always in all contexts, even if it's fat loss.
You're not a fan of assigning bland foods a halo and saying these are good. The whole halo effect.
Exactly. Because I think also yummy foods can. The thing is also taste is also subjective.
Yeah.
Like purple sweet potato. That's a whole food that's minimally processed and all that, but that shit is like fucking crack, man.
Yeah, I fucking love it. How good is it? I feel like not enough people in the fitness community know about purple sweet potato.
Yeah,
or at least I'm siloed.
Be the next Wheat Bix.
The next Wheat Bix, fuck. Chuck some peanut butter and honey on it. Actually, that would go down a treat. Yeah, interesting points. I would echo your thoughts there that the more you restrict yourself from a certain food, the more focused you become on it. And I don't know the, I guess, technical or like the underlying mechanisms behind it, but it's like I've got kids. The more you tell them not to do something or not to touch something, the more they fucking want to do it, the more they want to touch it, the more they focus on it. Like the more you breathe life into something being not allowed, it's like there's an innate part of us that is curious to want it more and to seek it out more. And I definitely think that being able to have it and allowing yourself to have, say, chocolate makes you not want to have it as much. And when it's there,
Yeah.
you're not as phased or fussed by it. I definitely think that's something I've seen in experience. Jackson, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, really keen to hear what you have to say on this, actually, Jackson.
Yeah, so I'm not advocate of bland foods all the time year round. I think it just needs to be scaled with your hunger. Now, if you're not in a dedicated fat loss phase, your hunger should probably be okay. So having regular treats or having a few squares of chocolate each day is probably not going to put you in a place of significant threat to your adherence. Whereas translating that to a fat loss phase, we actually do have research to suggest that maybe it could. So research shows that the overall amount of, let's call them treats, consumed in a week is not associated with the level of cravings that someone experiences, but the frequency of those treats is. So basically what it's saying is that you should take the amount of treats that you plan to have and sort of isolate them into less frequent consumption. So instead of having 2 Oreos a day, maybe have 12 Oreos on a weekend day. That, according to the research, that suggests for easier hunger management or easier management of cravings. And this is why I like to have social meals, sort of like in these infrequent social meals where highly palatable foods or more palatable foods can be consumed, because we know that that social meal, having a nice restaurant meal, is going to be palatable and it's going to lead to an increase in drive to eat, according to the research. But I think that that is a superior approach to having regular treats every day and having no social meal but tracking everything. And that would be sort of like the traditional IIFYM approach, where you have like fit in some treats, like nothing's off the table, blah blah blah, but like don't have cheat meals or free meals. According to where the research is at, it actually suggests that this traditional IIFYM crowd, evidence-based crowd, we've probably got our priorities in the inverse.
Do you think that there is like a sweet spot where the infrequency thing can be taken too far? So you suggested, or from my understanding, once a week is superior, according to the research, to like a little bit every day. So, 2 Oreos every day compared to, say, 12 a weekend. Do you think there's a sweet spot where drawing out to like once a month is, that starts to become negative, or, even longer, and then you start to see drawbacks, or it goes the other way? Do you think there's like a sweet spot?
Yeah, there is going to be a sweet spot, and I haven't quite figured it out yet. Like, for example, if someone's on an extremely bland diet, like on one end of the scale, I'm talking like brown rice and boiled chicken, and then you're introducing like Ben and Jerry's and sushi, like I think that has a worse psychological effect and impact on relationships with food and your drive to eat in the days following. Like having that like hyper palatable food occasion, and then having to then transition back to the opposite end of the spectrum, like going from one end to the other, like in 2 consecutive days. I think that like, even though that sort of supports what I was just saying in my last comment, I think that tends to have a negative effect. So there is a balancing point, and I'm not quite sure where the balancing point is, because we're using terms like bland versus palatable, but it's like it's a scale in reality, isn't it? It's like I'm not programming brown rice and boiled chicken or boiled white fish for my clients, but like I still consider my foods to be relatively bland, but it's not on the super end of the spectrum. So
it sounds like there's two considerations there. There's the like palatability of the food that they're going to consume in this indulgence compared to their regular foods. So that on that scale, and then you have a frequency component added into that. So if somebody's eating really bland foods and they're moving up the palatability scale to say Oreos that go on the other end of the spectrum, there's going to be a consideration of that as well as how often they're going to do that. So I think that's going to be hugely dependent on the context, because if you're somewhere in the middle of the palatability scale, you probably could have more frequent indulgences because you're going back to something that isn't that poor tasting. So you're not going to want to crave that. Whereas if you're going from one end to the spectrum, you probably want to delay that and have that less often, because it'll just cause you a lot of difficulty going back to your regular diet.
Yeah, I'm almost certain, and I haven't been able to find any research on this yet, but it's something that's been on my mind for like a while in terms of like a study that could potentially be done. But like, you have these things called like pleasure scores on like when people eat foods or meals. And I'm almost certain that the bigger difference in the pleasure scores of your palatable versus bland food eating occasion, the bigger that difference, the is going to be associated with a bigger drive to eat, cravings, and probably like instances of binge eating, I reckon.
And that's where you would have those kind of indulgences less frequently if you're having a really bland diet, and you'd probably have indulgences more frequently if your diet is higher on the pleasure score on a daily basis.
Yeah, observationally, I feel like that's got to be on the money. That big peak and trough, like if you've got your usual diet and then you've got like weekend eating or indulging, and there's like this big gap between it, I feel like that's potentially more of a,
it's glorified.
I'm putting myself in a risky position by doing this. Whereas, like I really think it's important also to consider like, well, what is the definition of a bland diet that's ideal for fat loss? Is it the one that's just poached chicken with plain brown rice and plain broccoli? Or is it one that's like a bit up, you may be allowed to put some spices on it. You got maybe salmon in there as well. And like, although salmon's too high calorie, don't have that. Yeah, I just think it's important because that you're bringing up that side of things a little bit, but it still fits within, in my opinion, that framework of being bland. But by doing that, when you do choose to have a social meal or indulge consciously, the gap is narrower. Therefore, based on this and my understanding, reducing the risk of that turning into glorified binge eating.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like cooking your chicken, say, for example, in a non-stick pan with no oil versus being able to have a little bit of like spray on oil, using some spices, having more than 3 foods in your, fucking meals. Like it definitely, if you move up, that end of the palatability scale and you're able to have some, I guess, additions to your meals that would make them more enjoyable, it would make the desire to have those high palatable meals less, right? So if you would have them more frequently, you wouldn't be at risk, I wouldn't think. But that's interesting concept. Definitely something I'd like to see research. There's nothing on that, is there, Jackson?
No, it's something I'm still like it, because the IIFIM stuff is in terms of like dieting on foods with a high pleasure rating. It's relatively like new stuff, and so it sort of makes sense why we don't have a heap of research on it. But like just from like observations with things like the people who are like hardcore IIFIMers, I find from my experience that they struggle to diet. They struggle to they struggle to endure the discomforts of a calorie deficit more than people who have been sort of more accustomed to trying to eat clean, if we say it like that. Like I've got clients that like who will not go sort of meal plan approach, and they'll be sure that they have to do macros only. And like I'm looking at like these oat bowls that I'm thinking of one girl, an example that she's making, and it's like she's got the base of oats, and then there's Oreos, eight different ingredients, and like 20 grams of Captain Crunch and like 10 grams of Biscoff, like all around. I'm like, God, this is crazy because people see like flexible dieting as like it's so great for like managing our eating disorder symptoms and having really good relationships with food. But I look at this and like, this is a fucking red flag for a poor relationship with food. Like if I've ever seen one. And
I'm all
I think
for people like not having assigned periods of the day to eat a certain food. Like, I don't think that there should be a time where you have your oats. If you want to have your oats for lunch, sure, why not? In theory, it makes sense. But there's something about having chocolate, before the sun comes up that just doesn't sit well with me. I don't know why. And, smearing it around with berries and stuff doesn't make it better. I don't know. What do you guys think? It just doesn't sit well with me.
I think you've made a very health-seeking meal, a very calorie-conscious meal, and turned it into an indulgence.
Yeah.
A cake.
Before you do your cardio where you sip on amino acids.
But they'll never admit it. It's an indulgence because it's all calorie tracked. But I mean, like the mental ordeal to go through like 13 fucking separate measurements and like the 13 different ingredients to like prepare that meal. It's like, God, when we're talking about like sustainability dieting, we are so far from the mark.
I love when I see on Instagram when I see chicks have like their what I eat in a day, things, whatever, and they have like 12 grams of like peanut butter listed as one of their meals.
Literally.
Like, fuck, I can just imagine them like preparing this and like scraping off
like doing these ones,
little bits of their finger. And then I'm like, if they're scraping it off with their finger, do they put it back in the tub or do they fucking eat it? And are they lying about that? Like,
God.
I really want to know. I want to be a fly on the wall, Mackenzie. What do you reckon?
I don't know how you can have 12 grams of peanut butter, like, and just stop at 12 grams. Like, I mean, it's just kind of like that idea of, a serving of hummus is 20 grams. Who the fuck isn't having less than the fucking tub?
I agree.
On sitting, But I mean, it's the same thing that happened to Wheat Bix, unfortunately, RIP. It was a fantastic food, just amazing food. And then all these Fitspos have come in and added their fucking Oreos and their Biscoff to it. And now it's just been completely fucked.
Well, I reckon that's a great way to wrap up this conversation. Wheat Bix, you heard it first. Mackenzie thinks you're fucked because, fit chicks have taken it too far. Thank you very much for coming on, man. Really appreciate it. I'm sure listeners will get a heap out of that. Where can people find you?
Thank you so much for thank you so much for taking the time out of your days to chat with me and invite me on. I really appreciate that. It means a lot. And like you said, I hope the listeners did actually get some value from it. In terms of where people can find me, moderately active on Instagram. It's just at Mackenzie Baker with an underscore at the end, no spaces. I do have a podcast, although I haven't done an episode for a couple of months, being indoor and stuff. I've been on excuses. I don't want to hear them. So there's a podcast called the Macavolic Podcast. You can follow Fortitude Nutrition Coaching as well. And I'm really open to people just sending me messages about questions or, can you clarify this? And that's one thing I really want people to do after the JPS Ultimate Evidence-Based Conference is just really feel like they can message me about something in the presentation. Hey, I didn't understand that. Have you seen this paper instead? This contradicts what you said. Like, you want to look at it, blah, blah, blah. So, always feel free to shoot me a DM. And, I think that's pretty much it.
Next time I have my indulgence, I'm going to slide in. I've got some questions.
Go for it, mate.
We'll see you in October. And until then, guys, thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.
See you guys.
Thank you.